What is a space historian and what do they do? Well, I think anybody can call themselves a space historian if they put the work in. My first degree was in English literature with a minor in history, and so I learned a lot about evaluating primary, secondary evidence and all that kind of stuff. But really, there are people who work for NASA, who work for universities, who chronicle and conserve and preserve and interpret all the wonderful stuff in the 20th and 21st century, even before that, of what happened in the space race and before that and after that. But I think what I like to do is try and write the stuff that I want to read. I've always been curious about, there's this tiny sliver of history where people started going into space, and even as more and more people go into space, and there are hundreds of them now, they'll only ever be the first, will always be the first. So I was really interested in what was it like for those people? Who were they? What did they do? How did they end up on a rocket some morning, knowing that whatever happened that day, it was going to be an interesting day? So I encourage everybody to be a space historian. Get those stories down, ask those stories, write those things down. For me, I can only say this is something I grew up following on television and going, these are people doing stuff right now. And then when I moved to America, and particularly California and Southern California, where so much of it happened, a lot of the stuff was built here, I thought, I can meet these people. Instead of being very, very unusual, rare sightings as it was at one time in England to meet astronauts, they were my neighbors. I could call them up, and I was working at museums where I could host a book signing for them. I could work with them. They might come to an IMAX movie that we were hosting. It became part of my career to be around people who went to the moon, and that became fascinating. So for me, it was a question of, there are all these things I want to ask them. I would have the choice of perhaps going to LA and spending a couple of $100 in a conference to sit in the back of a room and hear somebody on a stage tell some wonderful things. But along the way, somebody said, why don't you go as press? Which meant I could go for free. It meant I could ask all the questions I wanted to ask them, and all I had to do afterwards was write it down. That seemed like a no-brainer to me. So that developed into writing books and doing television shows and other things, because it was something that I really wanted to know the answers to the things I was asking. And if I wanted to know, I figured a whole bunch of other people did too. So, and that's turned out to be the case. The books and other things have done very well, because it seems we all have those questions. At the end of the day, we all have that bit inside us that goes, what was it like? I think almost everybody who went to one of your amazing Space Fest shows over the years is in some way a space historian, because we all got those first-hand stories. We got to look directly into the eyes of the space explorers, whether they were astronauts, whether they were engineers, whoever they were, and get those stories firsthand. And as long as we share those stories, even if we just remember those stories, we're all space historians in some way. But I suspect you're asking more about the formal field, and there is definitely a branch of history now which wouldn't have existed, just 150 or so years ago, or even less in some cases with human spaceflight, to be able to tell these stories and what was it like. And like so many of these things, they're big government, big corporate, big engineering things where people weren't writing that stuff down. They were too busy doing it. They were too busy making the rockets to think, how is history going to be remembering that? And the Smithsonian, had to really change, because a lot of the stuff NASA was discarding, they were using again. They were ripping panels and things out of spacecraft, reusing them, thinking this is operational stuff. It's been a real change to think we need to preserve and protect this stuff. So there are historians doing that now as we change from being operational in things like Apollo and then the space shuttle into how we're going to preserve and conserve and protect this stuff for future generations, who some are even wondering, did we really go to the moon? It's going to be very important to look at this stuff and go, yes, we did. And here's the thing we went in. Those things kind of go together. When I moved to San Diego County, I realized that there were all these astronauts I could meet. And one of the first ones I met and sat down with was Al Worden. He was not living here, but he was coming here to the San Diego Boat Show. And I really wanted to meet him. I ended up meeting all the people who walked on the moon and most of the people who journeyed around the moon, like Al. And in doing that, I called the boat show people and said, well, what time is he appearing? Is he giving a talk? And they said, oh, well, who do you write for? And that's something that hadn't occurred to me. And so I got in touch with a spaceflight magazine I had been writing some things for, and I said, could I get a press credential? They got back right away, said yes, so that all of a sudden I could go to the boat show for free. Got there early in the morning thinking, I have no idea what this guy's going to be like. I thought he'd be nice, but you never know. Sometimes you meet your heroes and they're not quite as nice as you hope they would be, whatever field of professionalism or whatever field of achievement they're in. Sometimes I've met some musicians and some artists and people I've been like, oh, I still like their work, but didn't really like them. Al turned out to be wonderful. Boat show wasn't open yet. He sat down. He must have done this hundreds, if not thousands of times before, but just as I saw him do with many other people over the years, he sat down, gave me his undivided attention and his time, and we had a great time. He ended up taking me out on this boat and showing me how it worked, and we had just a great day. So that started something that lasted for the rest of his life. Wrote a great article, ended up helping him with a foreword to a book where he realized that I could get his voice, which was difficult because he was a natural raconteur. He was somebody who liked to tell stories, and that's not something that always translates onto the printed page. So to be able to write like somebody speaks without it actually being a literal transcription of how they spoke I had to do a lot of research about Depression-era Michigan farm boys, which was not something I ever expected to do when I was learning about the space program. But along the way, I'm always very reluctant to call anybody who's a public figure my friend, because I see that all the time, people taking photos with famous people and saying, here I am with my close friend, this and that, and I'm thinking, maybe. But with Al, I feel like I could say over the decades that I did become friends with him. We spent a lot of time together, and he had a burning need to write his book. He had a personal story that could only really be resolved by him telling a story. The book was actually the end of the story, if that makes sense. And it was a tale of trial and tragedy, of redemption, of being fated by kings and queens 1 month and then being fired and told to get out of Houston within the week, less than a week. What a story. And to be able to come back from that and to redeem his character, to redeem his reputation, was something I was very proud to be involved in. He didn't need me, but I was glad to help him in fixing that for him. And the last decade of his life, I'm told, his daughter just told me the other day, he had a kind of a peace that he didn't have before, and that means a lot. So we had a very good relationship, I think. If you told me as a kid or as a teenager that I'd have that kind of relationship with somebody who went to the moon, I wouldn't have believed you. And certainly I'm friendly with and professionally work with a lot of other spacefarers, some of whom I'd like to think I'm close friends with, some of whom I understand it's a professional working relationship and wouldn't presume to ever think they're my friend. With Al, it was something special, which was very sad when he passed away. It took me a while to get over that one, and yet what a life that guy had, and I was very proud to be just a small part of it. That's been a very lucky thing, which when I was a kid, if I had imagined some of the people I would get to talk to, and a lot of them have passed away over the years because some of them were the original cosmonauts and astronauts, the original spacefarers, I would never have believed it. And over time, once I wrote the first couple of books, I've been spoiled. There's people who've approached me, would I write their book with them? And I've had to say I can't. I've got too many other things going on. I've helped a lot of people behind the scenes with editing, proofreading, and getting publishers involved, finding them co-authors, but there's been a lot of things I've had to turn down, and normally it's worked out for their benefit because they found some wonderful co-authors and created incredible books. But over time, I've been offered so many wonderful possibilities, and recently I've had the opportunity to write with some incredible female astronauts. I've also had the opportunity to work with one of the very first black astronauts. There are all kinds of stories, and that's where this will never get old. There are the originals, the firsts, and their stories are special, but there's so many different firsts from so many different generations, so many people who are the first in their field, or the first of their ethnicity, or the first of their gender to do things, and it's just, everybody has a wonderful human story, and I will never tire of doing that. So I've been so lucky that, and I never take it for granted, that people come to me and say, can you help me write my story? And I'm thinking, you did this amazing stuff and you're asking me for something. It never gets old, and I'm always incredibly grateful. I really don't like that word colonize. It has all kinds of horrible implications. I mean, right now I'm in San Diego County, which is the ancestral land of the Kumeyaay, which here as a white European is kind of like, there's a lot of interesting history as to how that happened. That colonizing is, I hope we don't have to repeat the same mistakes in history of the past that we did. But should humans go to Mars? I love the fact that right now Mars is infested with robots. They're scuttling around everywhere, learning all the different kind of things that we can learn with robots. You might remember that my good friend space historian Jay Galantine and I once had a mock debate where we were arguing about human versus robotic spaceflight, and we were raising money for the Ataxia Foundation, which I know is very dear to your heart. And it was a mock fight because I love both. I love the fact that humans are going into space. I also love the fact that we're sending robots to do the kind of jobs that humans can't always do. And certainly on Mars, we could have gone to Mars in the 1980s as a species, could have got there, found life right away, and realized it was the life we brought with us because we just threw a poop bag on the surface and we just destroyed any chance of finding the original microbial evidence of life that some people believe may still be on Mars. So we're doing it slowly and carefully, learning all the things we can learn. I love the fact that we're caching little rock samples that we're hopefully going to bring back one day and study in labs. All kinds of great stuff. Whether we send people to Mars is, why? I think there's something about humans wanting to ensure the survival of ourselves as a species, and that's a good thing. Whether that's Mars, I don't know, but I think the drive to go to the next place, again, as long as it's done responsibly, which in Southern California, the history is not particularly responsible, it's a great drive. Personally, right now, as well as the robotic exploration of Mars, as well as the icy moons far out in the solar system, I love the fact that we're studying more than ever big rocks that are coming our way. Because what would it say if billions of years from now there's some other species on this planet who say, you remember those humans? We realized that they had the technology, they had the ability to stop that enormous rock that was coming and wipe them out, but they just never quite got around to it. They were too busy watching Pauly Shore movies to ever really bother. We spend more in America on pizza and makeup than we do on the space program, and a small fraction of that is looking for these asteroids that could wipe out our entire species. I know you can't do without makeup, but I could do without pizza for a year. I don't know, I think it's a good investment. I think we should look into that. And so, yeah, I think we should be out there.